Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Glue Stick channel. Patron request time. Today we're going to be talking about Velsharoon. And before we even start, I just wanted to point out that Ed Greenwood confirmed in August of last year that Velsharoon is still very much active in the Forgotten Realms. So who, or what, is Velsharoon? The Archmage of Necromancy, also known as Malifleur, is the Faerunian god of necromancy. But what about Vecna? Although Vecna is a powerful undead god, he is not primarily a god of the world of Toril. The power of struggles around the mantle of god of death, dying, undeath and necromancy has been quite a soap opera in the Forgotten Realms, and although things seem pretty stable at the moment, that could certainly change. For instance, the Raven Queen could get involved. As a mortal, Velsharoon was a renegade red wizard of Thay who lived in the Tower Terrible in Surinnar, as well as a few other places. He aspired to the position of Zalkir of necromancy, but was driven from that land centuries ago after feuding with his chief rival, Zastam, and several other powerful red wizards. Nearly as powerful as his arch-rival, Velsharoon spent many decades seeking enough power to destroy Zastam and other wizards that challenged his evil machinations, including Halder of Delzimur, Hlandrar of Helruer, and the Symbol of Aglarond, and of course Elminster of Shadowdale. In a very old ruin in the plains of Purple Dust, southwest of the city of Zindalank, on the Sepfar water, Velsharoon discovered a process laid down long ago by Talos the Destroyer, greater deity of storms, forest fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, and destruction, by which a great wizard can achieve demi-powerhood. Velsharoon managed to complete the ritual, which first turned him into a lich and ascended into the ranks of Faerun's pantheon with the sponsorship of Talos at the end of 1368 Dale Reckoning. This path to enormous power was a trap, though, laid out by the Stormlord to lure his most egotistical followers into assuming far more destructive power than a mortal could possibly handle, forcing them to call on the Stormlord to save them, who would simply exploit them until they were destroyed. Velsharoon did what any hyper-intelligent, scheming evil wizard does. He plotted and double-crossed his way out of it. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. He took the chance because, and this is really what Velsharoon is all about, so it's important to examine his motivation for what happened next. To become a lich, usually, is the path of a wizard who refuses to surrender to death and tries to trick their way out of it, or they simply think that with their arcane power that they control, that they're beyond such petty concerns of life and death. Velsharoon has a more unique point of view that has become the dogma of his faithful. For him and his followers, the pursuit of knowledge and the advancement of the mortal condition is everything. The knowledge of a method, a pathway to divine power, was worth any sacrifice to Velsharoon and also to his followers. Knowledge is power, and knowledge of life and death brings power over all things living and unliving. That is the core of the faith. So, clerics and fanatics of Velsharoon really just consider life and death to be two states of existing. They have no greater respect for either one. And when you consider in the high fantasy worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, things return to life and the dead exist with a semblance of life, the line is already very blurred, as it stands to reason that some folks would become obsessed with the possibility that neither state is permanent, and a pathway to divine power begins with understanding that mortal life and death, physical incarnation, is not the same as existing or not existing. And that is the spirit with which will make the transition into godhood. So it's the entity inside the mortal flesh, not the mortal form. So followers of Velsharoon look at mortal form as an entirely utilitarian thing. They see them as the body as nothing more than a vehicle made of component parts and running on either positive or negative fuel, so to speak. So Velsharoon took up the pathway offered by Talos, and in the moments when the tremendous power and awareness threatened to tear his mind and body asunder, he called out not to Talos, but to Azuth. So why did he do this? As a mortal, Azuth coveted power, researching the arcane lore of a dozen fallen empires in efforts to further his magical study. Eventually, he was recognized and highly rewarded by Mystra, becoming her first Magister. But that was not enough for Azuth, who then sought to carve a piece of the deity Severus's divinity and bind it to himself. Eventually, after many struggles, he managed to bind Severus in a magical staff. Severus has since been released from the magical staff and basically serves Azuth, or he did. So Azuth hooked up with Mystra and ascended to divine status as her boyfriend. So Velsharoon saw a kindred spirit in the obsession with power displayed by Azuth, and sure enough, both he and Mystra helped to block Talos from seeking immediate vengeance against Velsharoon. And he's since secretly renewed his alliance with Talos and has been flirting with Shah, although he still nominally serves Oerth. It's an uncomfortable situation, and Oerth and Mystra know that Velsharoon is certainly capable of much treachery. Because he is obsessed with gaining not just power, but secrets with how that power is both acquired and granted, so he'll weasel his way into anywhere where he can get that information. This is a great villain archetype. Velsharoon is neutral evil, so a self-serving monster at the worst of times, but under the right circumstances, actually pretty reliable. If there is some information pertaining to the acquisition of power by mortals or the undead or divine beings, and getting to that knowledge requires forming an alliance with another being, Velsharoon is absolutely reliable. If another being stands between Velsharoon and that same bit of information, he is an absolutely implacable enemy. The Church of Velsharoon is a new one, and what hierarchy exists is found within the individual temples. They have the central tenets of their faith, but and the dogma of Velsharoon, but they don't have a central organizing body. They don't have a book of codified rituals and things. No cathedral and supreme leader sort of situation. Many clerics of Velsharoon spend their days totally immersed in necromantic research, seeking to understand and expand the faith's collective knowledge of life, death, and undeath. Most have created hundreds of undead servitors. Some of them are unique, and with that certainly provides tons of fun possibilities to DMs who love to homebrew their creepy crawlies. When an undead creation has served its purpose, those self-serving researchers often brand the symbol of their deity on its chest, which is a skull with a crown, and then just kick it out the back door with a vague instruction to just go away, which means that the undead creature is free to wander randomly across the world, murdering and causing mischief, and which will, of course, attract the attention of the sort of folk who take a dim view of that sort of nonsense and will track the undead back to its origin and teach the necromancers a bloody good lesson in research ethics. Other clerics of Velsharoon are involved in support activities for their faith, namely grave robbing, embalming, and teaching about the life and death, essentially. So they can be the embalmers and grave diggers and things of your local community in Dungeons & Dragons, and people will be none the wiser. Novices and acolytes of Velsharoon are known as pallbearers. High-ranking priests have titles such as Soul Stalker, Crypt Guardian, Dead Walker, Bleeder, Life Leech, Spirit Sepulture, Spirit of the Seven Truths, and Necromaster. High-ranking priests have unique individual titles conferred upon them by Velsharoon himself. Velsharoon vestments resemble once resplendent, rotting wizard's robes, and the necromancer's clergy wear garments of varying colours of any shade of except red, for obvious reasons. But their habits are uniformly sombre sort of hue, old and worn looking. Most adorn their vestments with depictions of skulls and bones, but the faith is still young enough that fixed patterns of adornment from the various ranks have not yet developed. They don't have a uniform that they uniformly wear. While adventuring, Velsharoon clergy members favour iron-shod staves and cold iron or silver maces, which are effective when battling undead. Most eschew armour as it's too great a burden on their spellcasting abilities, obviously, with only the relatively rare clerics of the clergy garbing themselves in conventional protective garb. Typical priest or necromancer, disciple of Velsharoon, considers an escort of undead servitors as basically superior to any sort of armor that they can wear. Why wear cumbersome armor when you can just have a corpse absorb a blow for you? A few of the more congenial low-level clerics sometimes cure the ills of the populace and bring in funding of all worldly supplies for the church, and the more easily gather information by making themselves known as people who will heal and help. Now, this is something I wanted to talk about. The lower-level necromancers and clerics, they're a part of the community. They offer their services to basically anyone. They're not interested in preaching or bringing new faith folks to the faith. If you're a cutthroat, a bandit, an assassin, a pirate, a brigand, an outcast, a mutant, cursed or otherwise ill-favoured sort, or an adventurer, these healers don't give a damn. If you want that broken arm healed, pay up and it's done. You want to know how to poison somebody? Hand over the coin and they will give you the recipe. And hey, they might be willing to give you a totally reliable vial of poison and dispose of the body for you, no questions asked, for a nominal fee and very reasonable price. Best not to ask what the corpse is going to end up as, and if you just happen to see that corpse a month later digging up bodies in the graveyard, don't mention where it came from. When the players arrive in town or meet some stranger on the roadside and healing it is offered for money, do they stop and carefully inquire about the healer's religious affiliations? No, they do not. And they don't check the labels on their healing potions either, so that's certainly something to consider as a dungeon master when you're designing your background and the people who live there. Clerics of Velsharoon pray for their spells at midnight. They tend to be up at all hours of the night, buried in books or up to their elbows in dismembered body parts or on cold laboratory slabs. For a relatively young faith, the clergy of Velsharoon have quickly established a large number of holy days and rituals, but of course they're all over the place and they're not codified, so they're different in every particular place you go. They're yet to coalesce into a homogeneous creed. However, these wildly varying rituals are found not only in different temporals but within the individual priests themselves. They worship in their own particular ways. Two rituals have become pretty widespread though. That is the Binding of the Crypt and the Pact of Everlasting. They are two rituals performed by powerful clerics, allowing them to return an undead creature or be raised from the dead automatically if they're slain. I know of a lot of adventurers who are not even going to bat an eye at where the knowledge came from in their eagerness to make use of that one. Really? I can be raised from the dead automatically? Yes. Both rituals involve numerous other horrible incantations and the foul sacrifice of numerous good-aligned sentients, but the cult of Velsharoon might have individuals who are valiantly attempting to find ways to sacrifice non-sentients instead, which is nowhere near as effective but causes a lot less problems. Prominent theologians of the faith claim that these rituals are merely the two of 7 to be revealed by Velsharoon to his faithful along a path to achieving true spiritual immortality. Many of his clerics multi-class as divine disciples, necromancers, or, if part of the cult of the dragon, as wearers of the purple. The faith has a few spells and rituals that are sought after and taught among them. One is the ritual to create a crawling claw, which they call the Claws of Velsharoon. And obviously, if you're familiar with a crawling claw, I've got a video on that, by the way. You need the hand of a murderer to do that, and crawling claws are very powerful little undead critters because they can't be turned like undead creatures can normally. They have a spell that allows the caster to assume undead form for 1 round per level of caster. They also have a spell that allows the caster to assume a gaseous form for 1 round per level. Velsharoon was presumed destroyed when he was engulfed in fire in 1425 Dale Reckoning. His torched body was eventually secured by the people of Aglarond around the time that the Dales Compact was renewed in Misty Dale between the Dale Lands and Mithranor, and the Standing Stone was restored. But make no mistake, Velsharoon is still active, if even less concerned with the activities of his faithful. He remains obsessed with the experimentation on the living and the undead, cares very little for the fate of lesser creatures, while at the same time working on his grand pathway to true immortality for all mortal sentience, no matter what the cost. Kalimvor, the new Lord of the Dead, and Yergel, Scribe of the Doomed, actively oppose Velsharoon, and his predilection for black necromancy violates many of their most cherished tenets. Also, they're not yet numbered among his enemies, but it's very likely that Velsharoon will find himself opposed by many of the gods and powers of nature, including primordials, and by the triad of law and justice comprised of Tyr, Torm, and Ilmater. And by Lathander, the Morning Lord, of course, obviously. He's definitely against all forms of undead stuff. Velsharoon prefers to manifest as a great disembodied human skull glowing with red, pale blue or pale green flames, or blue-green flames. Such an apparition appeared in Skull Gorge following the Battle of Bones as the human troops made their final assault on the goblinoid armies. Although Velsharoon was a mortal necromancer at that time, church scriptures claim that the unholy visitant foreshadowed his imminent ascension to the pantheon. So it's possible that he actually wibbly-wobbly around in time a little bit when he ascended to godhood, which would certainly play into the fact that when he ascended to godhood, there was that trap of Talos which overwhelmed him with awareness. So he was actually subjected to the full history of the timeline, as well as kind of being present in it at the same time, which would be enough to drive most people crazy. The phantom blazing skull is immune to all attacks and apparently is simply an apparition. However, anything standing within the radius of the flickering flame suffers 46 points of magical fire per round, saving throw for half. So it's kind of there and not there at the same time. Velsharoon is served by many forms of undead, both sentient and non-intelligent, and both free-willed and controlled. In particular, he manifests his will through blazing bones, boneless clawed hands, dreads, flame skulls, flesh golems, and poltergeists. He's also served by living creatures such as fenhounds and scarab beetles. He's fond of black, purple, maroon, rust red, grey, and bright and unnatural green gemstones, reminiscent of green slime in hue. These are often held sacred to him, and their discovery is said to denote his favour or his presence. The overnight appearance of an adult blood rose plant is said to herald the impending arrival of Velsharoon's avatar or manifestation among his followers. I hope that inspires some of you to include some sneaky and creepy necromantic cultists in your games. They're one of my favourite tropes for sure. Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed already, feel free to do so. Be sure to hit the like and notification bell as I upload from the other side of the world sometime in your future. For access to all the scripts and 1 week advanced access to these videos, consider becoming a patron of the channel on Patreon for a minimum of just $1 per month. And much like this video here, you get to request specific video content from me. Join the community on our Discord server, there's a link down below, and come say hi. And if you want to pick up a new video game at a significant daily discount and help me out in the process, there's a new game every single day on Chrono. There's a link down below, as well as a link to my store with a lot of the merchandise, which is pretty new on the shop shelves, actually. There's some pretty gnarly looking shirts there if you're interested in supporting me that way. As always, thanks for listening. I'll be back with more for you very soon.